Thank you, Amy, and can we thank Amy for pulling together this awesome thing? Because without Amy, I wouldn't know you. So it's all about me, really. And I'd like to tell you guys something about myself that Amy doesn't know. So don't tell her. In addition to my day job of climate risk analytics, the only other thing that I really love doing is conducting choirs. I'm actually a literal choir conductor. So if you wouldn't mind, just sit in your seat, get balanced, maybe sit a little forward, breathe in and out. Now a little deeper and a little higher. Now I'm going to ask you, breathe in and sing, ah. There were like, what the heck is going on in there? You sound fantastic. You're hired. And now I can say that I am a literal choir conductor, literally preaching to the choir about climate risk equals financial opportunity. I mean, you all know this, but what I'd like to do is, it's so fantastic that we're here in gold country, because I think of climate risk and climate data like gold. You have to dig it out, you have to polish it up, maybe you even have to make it into something wearable or useful like a ring, but then it becomes very, very valuable. So what I'd like to do is take you through how to do that and why. And I know that the break is coming up next and that the kind bars are really, really awesome. But what I'd like to do is in about 7 minutes, I'm going to share a secret with this room that is 180 degrees opposite from what the entire financial community believes. So this room is going to understand something that all of Wall Street doesn't understand. So, multi-billion-dollar opportunity to move the needle on climate change, kind bars. I mean, you can go if you want. But the way we can dig this gold out and make it useful and turn it from data into gold is what I call the 3 M's. And I call them the 3 M's because they begin with M. We can't mainstream climate risks. We can't get it from the realm of ESG into the realm of big investors until we can show that it is material and that it is measurable and that it is manageable, that we can do something about it, and that what we do then can have a return on investment, which you can't do unless you know how to measure it. So let's load our lips with talking points on a few of these things so that when you're asked at the next cocktail party your opinion on the materiality of climate risk, you'll have the right thing to say. So the first number that I'd love for you to just internalize is $306 billion. That's the number, that's the amount of damage from billion-dollar weather and climate disasters just last year, just in the United States, according to NOAA. And this is only disasters that have cost more than $1 billion. 980 million, we don't count that. So this is, and not only is this a large number, but 38% of these damages were insured. 38%. The other 62% was incurred. The other 62% was on somebody's balance sheet, whether it is a corporation or state, local, federal government, or a taxpayer or a homeowner. So these are real numbers. You're beginning to get a sense of the materiality. And because these numbers are so large, Investors know that they're holding them in their portfolios, but they don't know where, when, or how much these risks are in their portfolios, which leads to this bigger number, $82 trillion. That's the amount of assets under management in firms like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, around the world that have supported better disclosure of climate risks. Why do they want disclosure of climate risk? Because they realize, holy cow, I'm holding all this climate risk, but I don't know where, when, or how much it is. Corporations, can you please tell me? That became so important to them that the G20's Financial Stability Board spun up a task force on climate-related financial disclosures. You heard about that earlier. I'm sure they hired Madison Avenue to come up with that branding, TCFD. That's brilliant. And they released a report about a year ago today. It's like almost a year ago today. When I first saw Figure 1, I got this is how nerdy I am. I got so excited because it showed for the first time how to quantify climate. I actually got it tattooed on my lower back. So if you come to the lake tomorrow, you can see how in the center of this diagram is financial impact on the company. How is that impacted? Well, usually through strategic planning or operational risk management. They further break this down into risks and opportunities. On the risk side, there's the physical risks, acute and chronic, they separate in. Those are things like drought, wildfires, floods. How do those affect the finances of your company? And on the top, you can see the transition risks. These are things like policy, carbon pricing we know is coming along sooner or later, legal risks. Directors and officers are being sued for disclosing too much, too little, why didn't you tell us about your risks, etc. Technology risks, market risks, reputation risks, they're all caused by the change in the climate. And I'll tell you why I get out of bed in the morning. It's because of this side, the opportunities side. These are things like resource efficiency. What money are you leaving on the table, Mr. Corporation, because your water use, energy use, materials use efficiency is not what it could be? What money are you leaving on the table because your energy sources are in transition, etc.? Products, what money are you leaving on the table because your products and services aren't acknowledging the new reality? Well, this is all great, except that it's impossible. I mean, if you were tasked with let alone disclosing your risks, but even just evaluating them, how would you even do that? How would you evaluate your risks, financial risks due to wildfire? Well, it turns out it has to be material, measurable, and manageable. And that's what we do. That's what we've set out to do. We built a software system that does it. And when I've been talking with some of you in the past 2 days, you've said, well, isn't that hard to quantify climate risks? Of course it's hard. Ask Kimmy if free diving with a white whale shark is hard. Ask Brody if being the first person to climb up a glacier and ski down it, the first human on Earth, is hard. Ask Daniel if going from prison to advising the UN and the White House is hard. So of course it's hard, and we have to do it anyway. So I'm not those people, but I can program a computer. So let me show you what it looks like in specific terms. So this, for example, is a study that we did, or part of a study that we did for somebody who was invested at a large university endowment, and they own some of these companies, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Visa. And so we can now tell them, what are my risks? Where are they? And how do they evolve over time? What are the trends? So you can see it was temperature extremes, carbon pricing, storms is a mixture of physical and non-physical. You can see that the different companies have different risks. And actually that middle section is important because we heard yesterday Catherine talk about how you can't compare the absolute risks for Walmart against anyone else. But you can, in this particular analysis, you can divide by the assets. You can get a relative ranking of the risks, and that's super important. You can also see that this is a now problem. This is not a middle of the century problem. This is not a year 2100 problem. The risk in this analysis was already 72% higher than it was 10 years ago, and it's fixing to more than double in the next decade. So this is affecting balance sheets now. Let's look at the detail, because it turns out that to figure out how to get build reliable numbers, like Catherine was also saying, a lot of this is BS. But if you build it from the bottom up and use the best available science and data, that's as good as we can do. So for example, this is a study that we did for somebody who had a plant in this industrial area of Malaysia. And we found that they've already had a 4x increase in the risk of a 100-year flood in the last decade, and that it's fixing to, again, grow another 5x in the next decade. But you can see why it's very sensitive to the actual location of the facility and what's going on there. I was having a conversation at dinner last night, and we said, asset-level data is the holy grail. Is Steve here? He's probably outside getting a Kind bar. Yeah, asset-level data is the holy grail. Because you have to get down to this level in order to really build back up and then understand your climate risks. So let me give you some use cases of how you can use this in your daily life to cash in on the next gold rush, the climate data gold rush. And this is the last M, measurable. So here's the secret. Manageable. Thank you. Here's the secret I promised you 7 minutes ago. The entire financial world talks about climate as a systematic risk, which means it's a non-diversifiable risk. Can't trade out of it. And you can see why they would think that. It's called global climate change. It affects the globe, so it must, affect markets equally. And we know that that's wrong. You saw in my charts just a few moments ago, not only can you diversify out of it between sectors, of course, oil and gas has a different profile than, professional services companies, but you can also diversify out of it within a portfolio, within a sector. So we saw that Microsoft and Apple had different risks, just simply because of the way they do business and where they're located. Also, within a company, it's diversifiable and it's manageable as long as you can measure it. So here's a use case for investors. If you were, who's an investor in this room? Anybody from the yeah. So clearly active ownership and engagement with companies, it helps to have some data so you can say, hey, can you tell me about this risk? As opposed to just, can you just tell me about climate? Portfolio management, as I say, you can diversify out of this, you can tilt, you can hedge, but only if you know the data. Portfolio construction, we actually have a hedge fund that's building a water portfolio because the global hydrological cycle has changed, and it is continuing to change. The global hydrological, there's going to be winners and losers in that game. They want to bet on the winners. So they're constructing portfolios and, of course, strategy, governance, reporting. And then who here is from a corporation? Maybe a few? Yeah, some. Here's some examples of how you could use this data to harvest gold. cooling costs, obviously, if temperature is going up. Water quality and availability. Most manufacturing processes require water in the process or to cool the process. Employee productivity, if you've got people working outside, or if they just simply can't get to work because there's a wildfire or a flood. And then, of course, the direct physical risks. So to tie all this together, do you remember Amy opened our time together by citing the World Economic Forum, who said that one of the top risks facing our entire global economic system is the failure of climate change adaptation and mitigation. Failure. Well, I happen to be a climate change professional, so that means I'm failing. Why is that? And how can we fix it? How can we scale up our response? How can we fix our adaptation and scale it up, move beyond this small band of heroes to mainstream climate risk into business operations and investment firms? As Lila Preston said, I think it was yesterday, she called them big behemoths. We need the big behemoths to treat climate risk like any other risk. How do we do that? I would argue we have to show that the risks are material, measurable, and manageable. So let's take this choir, because you're now a choir. I heard you sing, so you can't fool me. Let's take this choir and sing to those big behemoths that climate risk is the new gold rush, and convince them that by using these measurable, manageable approaches, they can actually find alpha and save and make money. And in so doing, of course, we'll all move the needle on climate change. So thank you so much.